In an ideal world, everything would go perfect. But then you wouldn't need these videos. In this video, I'm going to try to solve this problem where the CPU and the GPU not only don't overlap on both plugs, but they don't overlap at all. So we're going to have to adjust the plan just a little bit. I am TheGrayingTech, a gaming insider. If you would like to learn how to improve your gaming performance, start now by clicking that subscribe button. So there's a couple of ways I can go about fixing this issue. The first is to reroute, but that's going to have more tubing in the middle, which is exactly what I am trying to avoid. Instead, I am thinking I will off-kilter these tubes just a little bit to get a better alignment straight into the GPU itself. So that should allow me to get the proper seal still down on the tube itself and get just enough of a camber on it that will allow me to successfully connect those two outlets. Let's see how I do it. So when it comes to cutting acrylic, this is the tool that I am going to use. I typically score it just a little bit and then actually do the cut itself. We will be using this. I also am going to be using this little auger bit. This is going to help smooth out the tube itself. And if you miss by a few millimeters, this will actually shave off just enough that you can get a proper fit as well. So what I'm doing here is I am dry fitting, for lack of a better term. I want to make sure I have the proper height out of my piece of tube so that I know exactly how much I need to actually cut. When I start to actually fit these pieces together, I will put lube around both ends, the O-ring and the caps themselves, seal it up really, really well. What do I mean by that? I don't mean drop it. So what do I mean by that? You'll see in the O-ring itself that it fits inside of a collar inside of the fitting itself. So when you put all three of these elements together, you get a very secure seal around the pipe itself. If, though, your O-ring is slightly askew, kind of like this, you've actually run into a bit of a problem. So what I like to do is use that lube, have the O-ring kind of in place, if I can, and then push the tube down inside. If you're worried about tearing an O-ring, the alternative is to have the O-ring in place around the tube and then gently massage it down into place in the fitting itself. Now, both of these instances, I think, are completely valid to actually install an O-ring. And once the cap is locked down on top of this thread, nothing should be moving. It shouldn't go anywhere. You should have a good solid seal at that point. And that is what I am banking on. If I can get the angle just right, I might be able to still salvage the design that I have in mind. Now, three things that I want to stress about putting in the tubing with the caps themselves. So you're going to be very, very tempted to squeeze this down as much as possible. What's going to happen is this inner O-ring is actually going to seat itself down further. That's going to give you less wiggle room when it comes to attaching this to either a 90-degree bend or another fitting or even the component itself. So you don't want to Superman over tighten these things. You just want it kind of finger tight. And then the second thing I want to stress, if for some reason you do seat it too far down, be sure to, on the outside, go around the ring itself, kind of pushing it up until it gets into the proper seat again. Lastly, I cannot stress the importance of a good tester like this. I tested each and every one of these components, starting with the tube and the top rad assembly, working my way down through the rest of the loop, ultimately running into some major issues here with attaching the CPU to the GPU, spending over a day troubleshooting and making sure that I had the bends right and that I had every component there properly seated so that I was assured that this setup was going to work. Continued to pressure test it, and I made sure that it was able to hold at least half a bar worth of air pressure before I was willing to move on to another component. What I know about this loop is this top portion of the tube and reservoir itself is not fully seated properly. That's the weak spot in this entire loop. That's the spot that sometimes air will leak out of. I'm going to make some slight adjustments to try to raise this up a little bit and get it seated more properly. But that's the kind of information that is important to kind of glean when you're assembling this. Know where some of the trouble spots are, know exactly how to test your fittings. Even if you have to do this piecemeal, it will save you a lot of time and trouble when you actually go to add water to your loop. And there you have it, we are complete. This right here is a parallel loop, meaning water is going to come up through this area, get distributed both to the CPU and the GPU technically at the same time. The pressure differences between the sides is what's going to force it to come up into the CPU itself. That might lead to slightly higher temperatures for the GPU, but ultimately it gives you a very clean aesthetic. Now, it's not perfect. Sitting here, I can already list off probably 6 things that I did wrong. It's not perfectly even, it's not perfectly square, there's certain pieces of it that sag a little bit more than what it should, but it's done. And so what's next? Well, I've already cleaned out the radiators, so next video I'm going to go over how I'm going to clean the loop itself in order to prepare it for a 1-year cycle of general use, everyday usage out of this system. And when that video posts, you can check it out right there.